Hello, I'm Joanne, and we're going to look at assessing the impact of time pressure and the effect on marking reliability and bias. Pressure to complete tasks within a time frame is a constant concern in many workplaces. It has been reported to narrow focus, limit research, and for markers to compare less criteria. This affects the method in which marking at a tertiary level is completed, and as such, bias may impact how decisions are made. When pressure is placed on an individual to make decisions and time is poor, negative evidence is often used to form decisions. We can conclude that if not enough time is given to a tertiary marker to complete the marking on an assessment task, reliability will decline. Generalizations and having to use speed will mean that heuristics may be used in preference, biasing reliability of results. Time pressure affects cognition negatively. This is a gap in literature this project will research. Literature on what substitutes reliability in marking is divergent. There are differing measures, differing perspectives, and discussions on the indicators that possibly can be generalised to illustrate or used to measure reliability. This area we investigate as there potentially is the data gap on what reliability and therefore unreliability means. The question of validity also becomes part of this discussion. The review on literature on marking reliability by Meadows and Billington does little to investigate the issue of time pressure and the impacts this has had on consistent, reliable marking. The information to demonstrate how reliable marking is and what time frame is necessary for this reliability is missing. Suggestions were made that when one feels time pressure, focus is narrowed, less research is completed, and less criteria completed. This would increase cognitive bias and reduce reliability of the subsequent mark. Trawling through journal articles, there is a huge focus on the types of assessment given and how this impacts scores and the ability for marks given to be consistent. How to do this efficiently and effectively is postulated in a number of research papers. Bias and reliability are discussed with differing evidence methods of looking at bias and trying to look at the correction for error that is needed, investigating personal and situational bias that are used when time is short. The National Tertiary Education Unit acknowledges that work is completed in tertiary institutions under extreme time constraints, and as such, biases are likely to impact how a tutor makes decisions about assignment quality. This thesis will examine the extent of this effect time given to marking that can change the consistency of results and therefore reliability. I'll also look at variances of marks dependent on the time given. Participants will be limited to those living in Australia and to help reduce some cultural differences. 30 participants will be needed to maintain adequate power when using an ANOVA to detect differences between groups. This should give a medium to large effect size and should lead to an 80% power, which is the minimum suggested power for an ordinary study as suggested by Cohen. 100 to 200 word written response that has been utilised by Psych 440 students and that has been moderated to represent a 70% standard will be used as the marking task. This response will be given to markers who will be asked to mark this task at 3 differing time points. One time point will be very short, the next more reasonable, and the final time point far greater than needed. The marks for each of these time cells will then be examined to measure where reliability was best. Theoretically, I would expect that after a certain time, reliability doesn't continue to grow. There will be a saturation point. I think that as time pressure increases, so does bias to finish a task. The premise of this study will look at differences between marking reliability of markers dependent on the time given. The one-way repeated measures ANOVA is being used to test for statistically significant differences between related sample means. Recruitment will be anonymous. Participants will be free to exit the questionnaire at any time. They will have read an explanatory statement and implied informed consent by completing the questionnaire is assumed. The significance and expected outcomes of this study is to look to add to the body of research to assess optimum time for markers to assess work to positively impact outcomes for students attending tertiary institution, for better outcomes for students and for staff. My references.